To an untrained eye, Splatoon 3 may well look the same as Splatoon 2, and yeah, the gameplay is very similar, from a more casual perspective at the very least. But I want to introduce you to the unsung hero that pushes Splatoon 3's design to new heights the series has never seen before, the UI. I'm going to hold back on going super in-depth and start with the stuff that directly affects every single person who plays this game. I may be in love with the fact the squid cursor now spins around every so often, but you might be a normal person who didn't even care enough to notice. What really matters are the changes that dramatically improve quality of life in-game. Splatoon 3 simply communicates more information to the player, but it's done in subtle ways that don't become overwhelming. For example, check out these new markers indicating where teammates have used specific specials. Knowing that someone nearby is using a crab tank is handy, but knowing where a tacticooler or big bubbler are will be vital in higher level gameplay. I also love the little messages of thanks you get from your teammates when they drink from your tacticooler. Getting a little refreshing message is fun and retains the personality of Splatoon, but it's also super useful for knowing the status of your team.
Another note on Tacticooler is that when you drink one of the sodas, you get a soda icon. This is useful information to know who has gotten one and who hasn't. There is a lot of indicators that make it abundantly clear who has taken a drink, like the small arrow animations you see on your character. And this as well makes game awareness in competitive play more intuitive.
These kinds of improvements make your gameplay experience so much better, and the genius part is they're designed so you barely even notice that's happening. And Splatoon 3 is full of examples of this. Understanding the state of play when it comes to who's alive is so much better. This X animation quickly plays when someone is splattered, which encroaches into your gameplay space just enough that it brings your attention to it without being too distracting. Death markers clearly indicate where a player died, which team they were on, and if it was your teammate or you who splattered them. Each of these have subtly different designs to easily and quickly communicate vital information to the player with zero thoughts needed on their end. Death markers also stick to the sides of the screen now, improving your awareness. When a teammate is killed nearby, there's even an animation to make sure this is brought to your attention. In Splatoon 1 and 2, you could easily be left unaware in a situation like this and play poorly as a result. But Splatoon 3 pushes you to be better and counter bad situations by improving your game awareness.
Something else that is interesting about the Tacticooler, and all the other specials and weapons in general, is the minimalist style icons associated with them. Every special in the game is limited to 1 or 2 colors at most, making most of these feel like logos. Having them as icons is really great for many reasons, but the main reason why it works so well is because of their unique silhouettes. Every special in the game has an icon designed to look like no other. For example, Trizuka and Ink Vacuum point at the same direction, and look very similar, but that extra color on the top of the vacuum really makes it more distinct from a distance, and the silhouette works better because the white circle on top of it is massive. This decision of approaching designs as silhouettes ultimately contribute to that fast-paced gameplay Splatoon is known for, as the icons serve the purpose of making things extremely easy to identify.
The massive list of quality of life changes goes on, including information on all abilities and specials on the map screen, and each ranked mode also has way more care put into their UI design. Rainmaker feels far more complete now. When you pick it up, your weapon and special icons are changed to the Rainmaker, clearly communicating to you how this changes your options, and to every other player who to focus on. Picking up the Rainmaker causing you to lose your special until you either win the game or die always felt a little weird to me, so I like the fact with the checkpoint system there's room to move the Rainmaker forward and then use the special you've charged. There's also a white Rainmaker icon in the center of the screen when you pick it up. I've definitely had situations where I thought I had it but someone nabbed it just before me, so this is a great way to clear up any confusion. Speaking of confusion, it's not always obvious which route you should take in this mode, or where the podium even is when you're new to a certain map, which they've now fixed by making them project Rainmaker icons into the air. They also project these Rainmaker symbols around them, which will always appear over the ink to make sure the podium doesn't blend into the background too much. More podiums in itself could also be a little confusing though, so when the enemy team is pushing, there are indicators on your screen of where the nearby podiums are. Since you're likely looking away from them, this will really help players adjust to new map layouts. They've also changed the score section at the top to now include team colors. If your team color is smaller in the bar, you're losing. It's always good to have simple simple, intuitive ways to communicate the state of play to users like this. Clan Blitz is great because it's the perfect opportunity to turn off the game and go outside instead of playing Splatoon all day long. But if you are bored enough to play this absolute mess of a mode, they have improved visual communication here too, with the icons at the top to tell you how many clams your team are holding, including if they have a power clam. The dots that connect your score to your team's clam count are also smaller for some reason. Aside from that, it's pretty much the same, and I honestly don't think it's enough to fix the communication problems with this mode. I really don't understand why Nintendo didn't add more commands to the D-pad at least, when this graphic is basically screaming at you that there's 2 buttons on the controller that don't do anything.
I like that some parts of the UI have subtle animations in them, like the order gear button, motion control menus, or even the Salmon Run prize menu. The pattern in the back moves almost to drive attention to the prize. It's subtle details like this that keep the game feeling as dynamic as possible.
In all modes, there's an indicator for who is in the lead, whereas this used to tell you which team was in danger. It essentially communicates the exact same thing, but I think the newer system makes more sense. The lead message also shows up throughout the entire game, whereas the danger message would only show up when an active push was happening. In such a fast game, it's good to be communicating who's winning at all times if you don't have time to read all of this information. What's far cooler is the new overtime timer. This used to be pretty vague, but now you're clearly shown how much time is left as color drains from the timer. The color used is that of the team who's currently losing.
The respawn counter also seems to have new animations that indicate when the player will respawn. Having a bar fill up is much more visual than a countdown is. This is especially relevant with Tentacooler once again, as you can see the respawn effects it has in action. And sometimes it can even help you differentiate whether you got splatted by someone with Punisher or not.
I mentioned this in my other Splatoon analysis video, but I really like the 2D assets in this game. The weapons at the top are now all 2D artwork instead of the 3D models that they used to use. This makes the whole HUD far more consistent in my opinion, compared to a mix of 3D and 2D assets in Splatoon 2. And of course, the new wipeout notification is not only a lot of fun and very rewarding, but an extremely important message to players that it's time to push in hard. While any high-ranked player should already understand this in previous games, it certainly is possible to lose track of the UI at the top of the screen when you're focusing on your character, especially for newer players. Now there's no excuse for people not getting on the goddamn tower when the entire team is down. Battles aren't the only place you'll see greatly improved UI though. As a player, your journey into actual gameplay is just as important, and it's clear a ton of effort has been put into both making this stuff cool to look at and intuitive to use. It goes without saying this new lobby is leagues ahead of the previous games, allowing you to do so much more than just stare at an orange screen. You can access your menu from anywhere in the lobby instantly, and when you do, it opens up with this cool animation, which is also used at the start of a news broadcast. In case it's not immediately obvious, this is a reference to an effect CRT TVs can create when turning on and off. This happens because the coils that deflect electrons vertically lose power first, causing the electrons to collapse into a straight line in the center of the screen. It's not something you'd see on a modern TV, but it is a trope I think most people understand to mean a TV turning on and off. And here we have an inky take on that same effect. I really love this animation, it's just such a great idea that's been perfectly executed. Once the menu's open, it looks really cool. Clearly this is designed to look like a modern phone with the notch on the top here. The mode you're currently selecting has this neon outline, which really makes it pop out both in terms of color, but also the depth created by the layers moving forwards. I have to assume the developers were inspired by their work on Octo expansion when they came up with this, because it does look pretty similar. Splatoon 2 really didn't put emphasis on the mode you're selecting other than having it being centered, but that's pushed so much further now. I also want to mention how smartly these modes are all color-coded. Green is more safe and chilled out, which makes a lot of sense for Turf War, and orange is a little more intense, while private rooms are purple, which is often associated with luxury or exclusivity. I also love how this tube thing in the back here displays the classic lobby background, which syncs up to the mode you're currently selecting in the menu. In general, it's great how they've implemented the old menus into this new lobby. Seeing everyone's score is no longer an animation with a set amount of time at the end of each match, but something you can look at for as long as you choose between matches. Then you can move on to some practice, or open up the classic lobby menu, again perfectly transitioned over into this new lobby system. I also think it's great the deaths are shown again like in Splatoon 1. This is a a really important stat to know if you're playing well or not, and I think making people aware of if they're helping or spending the entire game respawning will teach everyone to play better. When you open up this menu, the background is blurred to ensure it doesn't distract from important information on the screen, and I love how all of these elements point inward towards your Inkling. It creates a composition that leads your eye into the screen. It's also really nice to get a clear view of your Inkling. Back in Splatoon 1, they were just kind of discarded and thrown into the corner, which looks a little awkward by today's standard. Also, when this menu starts to load, your special icon fades out just before the UI elements behind it disappears. Interestingly, it leaves a transparent hole in the shape of your special, and the same happens when these elements load in before a match. This wasn't the case in the early Turf War footage Nintendo released back in April. As you can see, this UI element is actually different. This is cool because now the special fades into a transparent gap to match the special meter, making the whole thing more consistent. This is the kind of tiny refinement artists behind this game made that, in my opinion, justifies over-analyzing games like this. It takes a million tiny details to make something look professional and fluid, so I really enjoy being able to appreciate the work that most people will never notice. Now, let me show you the single best thing about Splatoon 3. The gear menu is so much faster now, which improves the user experience considerably. In Splatoon 2, it was so slow and annoying that I honestly avoided even opening it. And check it out, you load back in exactly where you left off instead of going to the center of the map. Speaking of the map menu is great too. While mostly the same in terms of functionality, I love how they've really completed the arts and crafts feel of Splatoon with this game's UI. There's no more super clean rounded rectangles with your menu elements, but instead rough shapes that have been crudely cut out and stuck on. Even the map itself is more of a collage that's been stapled into the menu, which both looks cool and is a great solution to summarizing such a huge map in such a small space. Tape creates the arrows explaining what leads to where, and is also used to separate the modes from the shops. Again, in Splatoon 2, this is all just clean, generic UI stuff, which is fine, but Splatoon 3 is overflowing with personality in a series that was already full of it.
Whenever you're presented with an option in Splatoon 3, you may have noticed that the bubbles around them are different from the previous game. I really love how they look now. The shininess feels very organic, and it makes it look like the bubble as a whole is moving. I'm honestly fascinated by how seamless the designers do things like this. Even when you hover over the option and it creates a splat, the movement still continues. I like that the majority of the option menus have these backgrounds made up of stickers and cool little designs. They give every menu so much personality, and continue the consistent look and feel of the game. The menu that lets you navigate the different parts of the game have those textures as well. The catalog button even has the little bicycle riding fish from the Return of the Mammalians trailer. I love how they treated the top of the menu as well. They made the backgrounds of the designs noisy while keeping the stickers clean. And every section has an icon now, which is really cool. The fact that the designers went as far as to give these tiny little icons texture just demonstrates how much care was put into the UI.
I also really like how these menu options are all slanted, and when you highlight them they slant in the other direction. The bright yellow color really couldn't stand out more from the gray elements, so it's clear which option you're selecting. The same can mostly be said for the gear menu, and I really love how tape is used at the bottom here to help divide these menu elements from these ones. As always though, the UI elements aren't too unrealistically perfect, so it's creased where it hasn't been stuck down properly. Let's talk about something else that's genius because by design you'd never normally see it. Having a player be able to see what they're doing in a game isn't always as straightforward as you might think at first. As soon as walls, other players, or any solid object is introduced, it can really mess up your camera and make a game almost unplayable if a developer doesn't work to fix this in a seamless way. Like in many games, Splatoon will either make your character or the object in front of you transparent to ensure that you can always see what's happening. When the camera is forced against a wall, it will raise just a little to make sure you can see past the character model, and objects that are clearly going to get in the way, like these inflatable things, will turn transparent to make sure you can see through them. This game is so fast, this is the kind of thing you'd probably never notice in normal gameplay, but when you stop to take a look at it, it's a really interesting effect. There's also the fact you always have to be able to see where you're aiming, and so if the cursor touches the Inkling will become transparent. However, there's a huge problem with this, because Splatoon has a design element that requires you to be able to see your Inkling at all times. In situations where the ink tank would become hard to see, your character turns transparent with the ink tank still visible. The design is simplified here, showing only a silhouette of how much ink you have left. In terms of UI, the ink tank is mostly the same, so I won't spend too much time on it, but did you notice when it follows the player it actually has its own momentum and will overshoot a little when the Inkling's direction suddenly changes. Small details like this are great for making the whole experience feel more smooth. In my previous breakdown of the Splatoon 3 gameplay trailer, I mentioned the new loading icon, but it turns out the old 2D animation from Splatoon 2 is still here as well, with updated colors. Much cooler though is the new animation that represents when data is being saved. I liked the old animation a lot, but now they've taken the same concept and turned it into a 3. Very clever. And oh my god, you guys, the conversation tech in Splatoon 3 is so well planned out. Here's the thing, text boxes suck. They're tedious and boring, but if you're not a native speaker of Squid, then you're probably going to need a visual aid to understand what's going on here. Rather than simple text boxes that flick through one at a time, Splatoon uses a more dynamic approach, where multiple characters can speak at once. Notice how Big Man speaks on the right side of the screen here, representing his location in comparison to Fry, who just spoke. When the camera moves to focus on Big Man, he continues to speak on the right side before Shiva replies to him off screen, with her text on the left, again representing her location in comparison to Big Man. This allows for a more dynamic back and forth between characters, whether you can currently see them or not, and feels so much more fluid than the traditional one block of text at a time. To be quite honest, I wasn't sure how I felt about Fry and Shiva at first. While Big Man was of course an instant classic. But the more you look into these two, the more you realize just how well designed they are. Splatoon is all about contrast, from the grey urban areas contrasting the colourful ink, to slightly more abstract forms of this like the modern and traditional style buildings in the hub area. The idols are the face of their respective game, and as such, Fry and Shiva are contrast incarnate. Let me explain. First of all, their colours are opposite. This much is pretty obvious. But what's more subtle is the use of sharp or rounded features. Shiva has a round nose and round ears, while these are all pointy on Fry. This also applies to their earrings, which is likely where this idea originated from. See, Shiva's earrings are the teeth of a shark, while Fry's are that of an eel. One is rounded and the other is absolutely horrifying, and it makes a lot of sense for these characters to be associated with those animals, considering a group of sharks is called a shiver and a group of eels is called, you guessed it, a bed, and also sometimes a fry. It doesn't stop there either. The names and the colours also both imply a contrast of hot and cold, and I'm fairly certain this ties into the game's story as well, with hot and cold sections. We even see the transition from one to the other here in the direct, where the agent loses their winter clothes and presumably moves into the hotter areas of the game. And of course, each of them have features of the other to tie them together, with rounded holes in Fry's trousers and sharp cuts in Shiva's. They also have each other's primary colours on their fingertips. Their studio in the hub is amazing too. You can check out DekuGamer's video if you want a more in-depth look at their overall branding, but I really love these guys' animations, especially Shiva's double take when she catches you looking before they all wave. Their studio is huge as well, especially compared to the previous games, and they've got a far more impressive setup. You've got a director just chilling here too with the newspaper in hands to point at them every now and then, and it's no coincidence the speakers on this TV look like suckers. There's just so much going on here. In their stay fresh pose, or whatever you'd call this, you can see both of them holding down 3 fingers, and I'm sure you can guess why that's the case. And of course, the 3 fit the blue, yellow, and grey colour scheme of this game. And yeah, the colour scheme of this game is actually 3 colours, not just the 2 that are in the logo. Grey is a great way to make things easier to look at amongst all the colours, so it's a good choice for menus. Since grey is neutral, you can use it pretty much anywhere, and it's paired with the main 2 colours all over the place, from this guy's work clothes to the colours of the gym and the ink visuals on the entrance to the lobby. Inklings are fun, and it's a good thing too, because they have the weight of an entire franchise on their shoulders. The one thing every single Splatoon experience you've ever had has in common is that there was an Inkling right in the center of the screen. And okay, everything I say here also applies to Octolings, but for the sake of time, we're going to focus on the OG species here. Inklings are the glue that hold the game together, and the window that allows you, the player, to enter the world of Splatoon. They need to perfectly communicate what this game is all about in every single frame of gameplay, despite the fact they can't speak a language that humans understand, and most of the time they're facing away from you. So how do you communicate fun and energy without words or facial expressions? Well, with body language. These guys just can't stay still. Even in their idle animation, they throw their weight around as they bounce up and down. As you'd expect from Inklings, squash and stretch is used a ton here to communicate what these squishy cephalopod guys are like. In your normal walk cycle, their entire face will squash up and down with the momentum of their body. Even when simply moving forward, they give off so much energy, with their shoulders raising and lowering, and their head tilting in the opposite direction to counterbalance that movement. When they don't have a weapon in their hands, they also move so much more energetically than they did in Splatoon 2. In fact, the Inklings are full of small changes that make a huge difference. For example, look at how they lean their center of gravity inwards while turning. This gives them a far more realistic sense of weight and looks so much better than the animations from the previous games, which feel very static and boring by comparison.
I want to take a minute to talk about the Inklings' expressions in this game. They are way more expressive in this game than the previous one. Not only are some visual details like the curling bomb animation still here, but new expressions like the roller smile is here too. I really like how much personality they've added with facial expressions alone, and we can see that the most in new victory poses. I just love the expressions they have with every pose. They just feel so loose and dynamic now, more so than the previous game. It might sound silly, but I do really like when they show their pointy teeth. It makes the expression more exaggerated and conveys what they're feeling better. Also, the victory poses is just another opportunity to show off the incredible hair physics. Please, I just want the Splatoon 1 Splatly one back.
I really love how expressive these little guys are in this game. Check out the expression when using a Splatana. You'll barely see it in actual gameplay, but just knowing they look like they're having so much fun swinging that thing around is enough to improve the feel of the game. And let's not forget the amazingly cocky expression on their face when their special is charged as well. What's a little more important though are the animations you'll actually see, and Splatoon 3 perfects these as well. Check out how incredibly cute and well thought out the animations are when testing weapons in the shop. You really get the impression they're excited to be shopping and trying out new gear to use in battle. Inklings are always having fun. That's really the key here.
Okay, I know we're focusing on Inklings here, but real quick, I want to point out a cool little detail when going through the shops. The Inklings lose their balance as the background settles in, whereas the Octolings jump so as to not get dizzy. And this detail is consistent with what we know about both species. And we should appreciate the massive upgrade in animation from the first game. These Inklings have gone through so many iterations at this point, both in models and personality. I'm just so happy with how they look now. And again, we should totally bring back this... Okay, I'll stop now.
The animations before and after fights are great too. You can really feel the weight of the Splatling here, and the same applies here, where the Inkling kicks their roller to get more momentum to throw it into the air.
And speaking of weight, trying out the new weapons in Sheldon's shop lets you see a fun animation for each weapon class. And here you can see once again how the weapon's weight affects the Inkling. For example, the Hydra is probably really heavy, and it shows them struggling to carry it. And these animations are different with Octolings, by the way. Again, I don't want to focus on Octolings too much, but has anyone else noticed that they seem less serious in this game? They adopted the Inkling lifestyle real quick.
They don't hold back on being cool either, like with the blaster stance here with their foot slightly raised, or here where they wedge the Splatana into the ground to lean on it. There's so much effort put into creating cool interactions between the Inkling and their weapon, and they all look so good. Emotes push these already great animations even further, giving your Inkling more personality and the player more customization. Though that said, it is a bit of a shame only the flip out emote will involve your weapon, while the others are just generic and the same for everyone. To be clear, this isn't really a complaint though. I completely understand giving each emote unique animations for every weapon would not only take a huge amount of time, but would limit what they're able to do. For example, you wouldn't be able to dab with a Splatling in your hands. But I do think a secondary emote in the vein of flip out would be nice to have in the future, just to allow for more variation in emotes that utilize your weapon. But they're not just expressive. Inklings have all been completely remodeled. I'm sure you're all aware that they're taller, continuing an ongoing trend since Splatoon 1, but did you notice their anatomy is more detailed too? With certain clothing, it's possible to see their collarbones and the sternocleidomastoid muscles which come down from the neck into the sternum, which... wait a minute, do Inklings even have bones? Well, either way, it's a cool detail.
We'll be discussing Salmon Run in a later video more in depth, but I wanted to briefly mention something that I thought was neat. Their uniform as a whole now resembles that of a firefighter in this game, and their helmets cover a large chunk of their face. This to me makes the job feel even more shady and is in line with Mr. Grizz's branding. It also makes it feel like that one-size-fits-all solution, you know? Anyway, I'm a huge fan of how the helmets look in this game.
Check out the Inklings' new ink tank as well. These things are super sleek compared to the old ones, and I really love how you can see the little tube inside that brings the ink into the weapon. Speaking of weapons, one thing I love about the specials is the new text they come with. When you're holding a Tacticooler, it doesn't simply say place, but instead, who's thirsty. This kind of thing applies throughout the game, and it's a great way to communicate the Inkling's personality in a way that ties into the UI. It's almost as if the game is speaking to you in a way that shows you what's inside the mind of an Inkling, thus further immersing you into the experience. The Tacticooler's design is great too. The cool air really helps push the feeling that these are refreshing drinks. When the reef slider reaches its destination, they do a little Akira slide. And if you watch this frame by frame, you can see the shark actually disappears before the explosion happens. Looks pretty funny. The track it creates are made up of lane dividers from a pool, which are blown away by the explosion so they can despawn in an interesting way instead of just vanishing. We won't spend too much time on specials, but I want to quickly point out that the inkjet continues the theme of the tea and coffee machine-based technology, and let's not forget about the return of Tentamissiles as well. To be honest though, now that Tentamissiles are less widely used, I actually miss being able to bully long-range people.
You may have noticed that when your special is charged, your Inkling's hair will glow and fly all over the place. Even their posture and facial expressions change. But something I'm just noticing for the first time is that there's another glow that stays on the head as well, and it even stays there in squid form. Maybe most of you already knew that, but I like how many visual indicators there are for something as important as your special.
Something right in your face that you may not have noticed is completely new are the hair physics in this game, and I think they're a huge improvement. The results you get are a lot more fun, like when you spin around. By comparison, in the old games it felt more like a preset animation than real-time physics. Some hairstyles even have fringe physics now, which is a really great additional detail that gives the hair so much more life. Another cool detail are the unique animations when coming out of Squid Surge, and I especially love how shooters will hold their weapon forward with one hand. I think this is the first time we've seen one-handed shooting in this game, but it looks really cool and adds to the feeling of quickly jumping out at your opponent and attacking them by surprise, like you're in an action movie or something. The Inkling's eyes will also follow the camera in this game, and this is most easily seen if you take a look at them from the side. In Splatoon 2 they just stare into the distance, but in 3 you can clearly see they're looking towards whatever you are. And finally, they really put way too much effort into the hologram Inklings you see in the lobby. Did you notice there are actually projectors in the roof to make these holograms happen? You can even see the trail of light between them and the hologram they're projecting. Not to mention the fact they purposely programmed in the flaws of a 2D projection. From head on they look 3D, but when you start to see the image from an unintended angle, the illusion falls apart and you can see it's just a 2D image. Not all games need a hub area. In most cases, a simple menu is great for getting you right into the gameplay in an organized way. Padding out the experience by making you walk around from option to option wouldn't add anything of value, doing nothing other than wasting huge amounts of time that add up the more you play the game. But when a game gets a hub area right, that's kind of a magical experience. I think those of us who grew up with games like Mario 64, Banjo Kazooie, Spyro, or even some newer games like Mario Galaxy will understand this the best. If you can successfully make a hub area part of the game itself, the immersion you experience goes through the roof, and especially as a child, your imagination is captured by the freedom of this connected world that a menu simply can't replicate. In fact, because it serves as the glue holding the entire experience together, a well-made hub will often become the most memorable part of that game. I'm not sure what I was doing or why it was so entertaining, but I know as a kid I had a blast running around Peach's castle and driving through the world of Diddy Kong Racing in a way that Mario Kart couldn't compete with. I loved Banjo Kazooie, but most of my time was spent just running around Spyro Mountain because I was too scared to go into Gruntilda's lair. But unfortunately, the art of the hub area came and went pretty fast. These were a glimpse into a future of gigantic, interconnected worlds, and now we're deep into that future. A lot of games don't have levels separated by loading screens, and so there's no need for a hub. And even Mario seems to have given up on hubs to explore in favor of straightforward world maps. So what games are keeping the dream alive and pushing hub areas into new heights in the modern day? The answer is of course A Hat in Time, one of the best games to come out in recent years, but also Splatoon. And when I say pushing hub areas to new heights, I really mean it. Splatsville is bigger than any previous Splatoon hub, not only giving us more space to walk around, but creating huge buildings that loom over us, packed with detail all the way to the top. There's a sense of so much life going on in this condensed area, but as a player you don't need to walk further to experience this, it's around you at all times. There's intricate, high-up pathways that give the feeling there's so much more to explore here than there really is, and some Inklings will even hang out in these areas. Immediately your imagination runs wild with what you'd be able to find if you could explore the whole world around you. You can catch glimpses of life on the outside, like the busy roads and train lines, and there's even an underground road that runs below the city.
I may be biased here, but I believe the underrated MVP of the hub is all the logos and designs we see all over the place. There's just so much personality and storytelling in the logos and designs alone. And some of the most fascinating designs to me are the ones on the right side of the hub. These stores are inaccessible, but are still treated as real operating shops by the developers. Every shop has a unique song when you stand next to them. Just like the shops that you can enter, play a song when you're near it. The real interesting part though, is the advertising for these shops. The screens all around the hub and in the lobby occasionally play ads for brands and maps. But they also play ads for these quote-unquote fake stores. Isn't that incredible? It establishes these shops as active, just unenterable to the players. The fact that they have logo animations at all is a great testament to how thorough the world building is. But wait, it gets better. These shops have complete brand identities. For example, this shop with the eye logo has 3 colors on their sign, and in their motion graphic, they use the exact same colors. And this shop conveys calmness by using slower animations. And this one uses the same eyesore green from the sign. It's so interesting that these brands are taken so seriously. I can go on and on about these shops, but I'll leave it at that for now.
This area is designed to make you ask questions that you'll never get the answers to. What's up with this gigantic building that's connected to the lobby tower? And what would I find just beyond this construction site? These days, I'd know exactly what to expect if I could actually clip out of bounds to explore. It is a video game after all, but even despite this, I still find myself asking those questions. Honestly, I'm pretty envious of people who are experiencing this game as a child. The amount of detail truly brings the world to life, like the AC units and clothes hanging from nearby apartments, the wires and pipes connecting the whole city, this key left in this motorbike's ignition with the little squid keychain attached, or the abundance of litter left by local Inklings. There's even an entire pile of bin bags tossed on the top of this building. You wouldn't think a detail like this would be something nice, but it really adds to the feeling of these areas being hangout spots for teenagers, which is something I think they've perfected in this game. Though I have to admit this card game area looks a little bit bland and unfinished. Some more grass would go a long way to improve the visuals. I really like the concept of what they were going for here, but the execution doesn't look quite so great.
The table turf area feels pretty empty to the rest of the place. Kind of looks like a Yakuza 0 area to me. But while we're here, did you notice that the Grisco building has a ton of their ads on it? And not just in the back, but also in the front as well. By the way, have you noticed how jank the whole setup for the Grizz and the Shoal building are? They both essentially go underground and to the left. Seems pretty off to me, especially for the Shoal, since it had a simple entrance in Splatoon 2. Also, I noticed that the TV on the Shoal building is kind of broken. Thought that was a cool touch. It really shows how imperfect and real this town is.
As the narrator says in the Splatoon 3 Direct, despite its old-fashioned appearance, the Splatlands have seen huge growth in recent years, and much like Japan, this means there's a huge contrast of large modern buildings and old traditional style ones. The hangout spot in front of the lobby is very distinct from the traditional style buildings tightly packed into nearby alleyways. You can imagine why different Inklings would hang out in these different spots for different activities, and it gives each section of the hub a unique feel. This extends to the shopping area too. In previous games, it honestly always felt like 4 random buildings slapped together, but this time they really pulled off the look of a mini shopping district with unique buildings. They're not just in a straight line anymore. Hotslantis is separated by moving it to the other side of the street, and Ammo Notes is a corner shop with Nort Couture slightly hidden away upstairs. Speaking of which, if you look closely before entering Crush Station, you can see it's actually down a flight of stairs. So the clothing store is on the ground level with the weapon store, the headgear store is higher up, and the shoe store is lower down, just like where those different types of gear are worn. And look, I love this stuff because I like fun areas to explore, even if there's not much of a point to it. But I'm not the only person playing this game, and I can fully understand if someone were to say this was all just wasting their time. But that's what's so genius about Splatoon's hubs. The detail and fun areas are there for people like me who care, but if you don't, you can simply open up the menu and skip straight to any of these at any time. It's the best of both worlds, really. Shops aren't the only unique looking buildings from the outside. The Salmon Run building is a great example of setting the mood right from the get-go, with the creaky gates that doesn't shut properly, leading you down into some kind of sketchy basement. The security camera and unchecked post box certainly doesn't make it feel any more inviting, and the Salmon Run gear, including gloves, boots, and even a frying pan left in this alleyway at the side of the building, is a great touch too. It also goes without saying this building matches the orange and green color scheme of Salmon Run as well.
I want to take a second to talk about this busy corner of the hub. It's common practice for small businesses to use these LED lights. They're very cost efficient, and oftentimes you can put whatever message you want. So the fact that they're here really is a great touch. And behind this cool little area, we have what looks to be traditional Japanese architecture, and there's small little logos of Deep Cut on it. I think it's a cool little detail to see these designs there, considering they're everywhere else during the Splatfest.
Splatoon is all about urban areas, but it's also about color. The grey of the buildings is broken up by various plants, and they seem to even have roof gardens at the top. The post box is bright red to stand out from its surroundings, and there's also a large red gate here, again very Japanese as Splatoon often is. The overhead trains also have graffiti along the side of them, and speaking of which, Splatoon 1 had a regular train station and Splatoon 2 was connected to a subway, but did you notice both games also had a monorail in the distance? In Splatoon 3, the monorail is directly over the hub area, and it also goes straight over a few stages, including Eeltail Alley and Hagglefish Market. Based on the graffiti, these are the exact same trains. Aeroplanes still fly over the hub like previous games, but considering Inklings fly around in little espresso machines now, are all of these modes of transport really necessary? Either way, they look cool though. The lobby tower, or whatever you call these things as a collective, is particularly cool in this game. The design is very sleek and modern, and I love the LED screens with the blue, yellow, and grey paint spreading across them. I don't know what this word says, but you can clearly see the word 3 written right here. Even now, I still really like Inkopolis Tower from the first game. It works as a great standout centerpiece and has a lot of personality, and the speakers vibrating outside are a great detail as well. Splatoon 2's hub area is fine, but it's honestly my least favorite. It feels like a bit of a mess to me, and this also applies to the Decker Tower. It doesn't look bad, but my eyes don't really know where to focus. There's just too much random stuff going on. There's so many visually stimulating things in Inkopolis Square that nothing manages to stand out. In Splatoon 3, this is greatly improved. I love this interior area, and these speakers are back despite being missing in Splatoon 2. Also, check out this nearby map. Again, I love the contrast of this modern hangout spots near the lobby with its LED screens, compared to the more old-fashioned alleyways packed with traditional shop signs. Having the lobby tower separated from the shopping area by stairs makes it feel far grander and more important, and pushes the sense of this being an entire city with different levels of elevation. By comparison, the old hub areas feel very flat. They have some changes in elevation, but the lobby tower is always just sitting on the ground there with everything else. It all blends together instead of feeling like distinct areas. Note the composition of the scene you're given as soon as the game starts. If you know what you're doing, you're likely to immediately start moving and completely ignore this, but it's been very precisely set up to put an emphasis on the stairs leading you to the lobby, or taking up less space on the screen, you also have ammonites. At this point, the game is purposely forcing you to make an important choice about where you want to go and what you'll see. Getting players to the lobby is the most important thing, so the entire composition of this scene is leading you in that direction. It's a huge building with a bunch of flashing screens around it, perfect for grabbing your attention. If you do follow it up the stairs, these walls limit your vision to avoid the other buildings being too distracting, forcing you to focus on the lobby in front of you. And once you reach the top, this pathway is clearly leading you straight forward, pushing the other modes to the side for now. But if you choose instead to look around a bit, even slightly glancing over to ammonites will immediately lead you down the shopping district. And just like that, any new player has immediately found the most important areas of the game on their own. Speaking of your journey from spawning into the lobby, this distance looks so much bigger in Splatoon 3, but when you put them side by side, it actually takes roughly the same amount of time to walk as it did in Splatoon 2. Splatsville feels far bigger and grander, but it's clearly designed to not waste your time either. Getting from A to B is more interesting than before, but it's not less convenient. But not everything here necessarily has a purpose, at least in terms of game design, and that's kind of what I love about it. In your time playing Splatoon 3, you would never need to come back here, but this area just exists. If you'd like to explore and see what's here, you'll be rewarded with some cool surprises and interesting areas, and if not, that's cool too. Interestingly, every game's lobby tower has a cafe nearby, and this is continued in Splatoon 3. I don't know if this text just says cafe or if it's a specific brand, but you can see it's consistent throughout the games. Unfortunately though, after 7 years they still won't let us in.
Why are you locking your doors to the public?
On the topic of the cafe, I find it very interesting that it's right above where the Splatcast is filmed. In Splatoon 2, the cafe was close to the Splatcast, but in a completely separate building. I'm a huge fan of the menu layout on the chalkboard, by the way. It's very easy to understand because of the triangulation it uses in the way it presents information. The menu being outside the entrance is a great way to get people in the door as well. Man, I really do wish we could go up there. What? Little buddy, get down from there!
Murch kind of creeps me out, to be honest. He's a bit too tall and human looking now, and I honestly think Spike was way cooler, but there is an interesting detail here. Notice how all the Inklings have upgraded from the old xylophones to these new purple ones. Well, Murch hasn't. He's still glued to his classic phone from Splatoon 2, and over time he slapped some stickers on there as well.
Another cool little detail about Murch is the sticker design next to him. This sticker, which according to Hotlantis is named 3CHP, can really be seen all over the place. But interestingly, in Splatoon 2, the same sticker can be seen next to Murch as well. I thought that was a pretty cool detail.
Speaking of stickers, check out how the stickers on this support beam are more tightly packed towards the bottom, but become less frequent as the higher areas become harder to reach. It's something that I wouldn't have considered that makes the placement of them feel more realistic, and it makes you wonder how an Inkling managed to get all the way to the top here. So the hub area is big and alive and awesome, but honestly what we've been looking at so far is the most boring version of it. Every now and then there's an event which truly brings the world to life in a way we've never seen before in Splatoon, but first let's go inside for a minute. Speaking of Splatoon 3's hub being bigger and more distinct, check out this amazing lobby. Splatoon 3 has a huge area you can walk around, not just some kind of void with menus. This room continues the yellow, blue, and grey color scheme of the game, like these support beams and these dummies. In fact, the grey look with yellow accents just looks really cool and sleek overall. Did you notice the big monitor here is actually a gigantic curved switch? It's a little hard to notice at first due to the lack of Joy-Cons, but you can see here where the Joy-Cons are designed to attach, and the USB-C adapter at the bottom here. When you start looking, there's actually quite a lot of details, down to little notches in the screen and even the screw holes here at the bottom. You can see on all of these displays they've added a pixelation effect to prevent them seeming too clean and unrealistic. And in other examples throughout the game you can see the LED lights used in the monitors. Kinda funny how sometimes you need to make something look worse in order to make it look better.
One more thing I want to add about the TV on the lobby is that the advertisements are based off of the printed ads posted by the Squid Research Lab before the game launch on Twitter. For example, this ad for Takoroka is based off of the brand reveal shown on Twitter. It's essentially the same ad, but given some motion, they were able to translate static images into a dynamic advertisement in-game. There's also another ad that does something similar. It seems to be a collab with another brand, but the printed version of it can be seen in-game, in the Eeltail Alley stage. I love how connected all these designs are. It really is what makes this game so special to me.
Like the world outside, Nintendo could have just given us this space as is, but they made a point of making it all feel big, like there's so much more to explore here than what we can access. There's a huge amount of space to the room around us, and I love the big windows bringing in some light, which also serve to help with the atmosphere when we experience the Splatlands at different times of day. The apartments everyone seems to want are smaller than we expected, but to be fair, I really like this solution. In theory, it adds the customizable space everyone wanted, without taking up too big of an area or having unnecessary load times. Your lobby will be constantly decorated with different lockers, which I think is a lot of fun. Much like you see in a game like Animal Crossing, giving players the freedom to customize their own space is going to lead to an infinite amount of fun ideas that the community will come up with. Check out the animation on the locker door as well. I really like it. Also, remember that map outside? The information on it is actually accurate to the layout of the lobby, with the main area, upstairs area, and the locker room. I'd go as far as to say the interior areas are one of the biggest upgrades here from Splatoon 2. The shoal is no longer just a menu, but a fun arcade-style building, complete with the kind of hideous crusty carpet you'd expect from somewhere like this. The details are so unnecessary but so much fun. Check out the balloons here, some of which have flown up and are now permanently stuck in the ceiling. The Grisco building is cluttered and uncomfortable. A single dim light is used to illuminate the room, which also leads you towards the most important interactable objects. I mentioned the CCTV before, but here you can see Mr. Grizz is actually keeping an eye on the entire plaza, though I checked to see if there were actually cameras in these locations and I couldn't find them, so That's unfortunate. So this stuff is all pretty cool, but what truly makes the Splatoon 3 hub stand out is that it's dynamic. Every so often the sun will come down and we'll be treated to a look at what this town looks like when it truly comes to life. The game starts to build hype by slowly showing the early signs of construction, and a small tent is set up to vote for our team, but for now everything's relatively normal. Then the sun starts to come down, allowing us to see all of Splatsville in a completely different light, literally, and lets us experience Splatoon in a way we never have before. It's honestly pretty beautiful, but most importantly the sunset is setting the stage and building hype for what goes down the following day. On the night of the Splatfest, you can feel the excitement in the air. The usually relatively quiet and chilled out hub area is injected with energy. Even Merch finally puts down his phone and starts getting into it. Taking sunlight out of the equation allows the colors around you to really pop. Everything feels like it's glowing now, which just looks incredible. I don't know what it is about floating balls of light, but they're just so good at adding to the mood. I mentioned earlier that I love how this hub has important areas that are easy to access, and side alleys that are completely optional if you feel like exploring. And this is where those areas really come into their own. Many of the seemingly pointless buildings around here open up and start selling traditional Japanese-style festival food. Everyone's having so much fun, and the working jellyfish are supporting the team of their choice with the Splatfest tea. They really nailed the vibe of a slightly quieter street just around the corner from where all of the action is going down. To a lot of people, a loud festival might seem like a lot of fun, but for me, I don't think you can beat being away from the action and seeing it all go down from a distance. The secluded spot up here where you can just kind of chill and watch the drone display is probably my favorite. And speaking of which, I do really think drones will, and probably should, replace fireworks in the future, so it's cool to see Inklings using that technology. If you are there for the party, however, the main hub is where all of the Inklings are hanging out and dancing. Fryer, Shiver, and Big Man will fly around on these things during the first half of the Splatfest, making good use of the huge map. But in the second half, they all come together right here to put on a show no Inkling could resist. And really, isn't that what Splatfests are all about? We get split into 3 different teams, but at the end of the day, we're all here to come together and just have a good time playing Splatoon. Before the legendary year of 2015, we had 2 video games, Military Shooter Guy and Military Shooter Guy Zombies Edition, and Chucky Egg 2, with these games combined containing a whopping total of 3 colors, all of which you can thank Chucky Egg for. This is an exaggeration obviously, before 2015 there were 2 good games, though I do think it's fair to say a huge amount of mainstream games, if not the majority, suffered from a lack of color and creativity in their art. Maybe you had fun calling kids f***ing idiots while playing Military Shooter Guy online, and good on you for doing that, kids are indeed fucking idiots, but if you took some art from this game and put it on your wall, it certainly wouldn't grab my attention. However, there is one company who couldn't care less about the industry standard or your expectations from a video game. Being out of touch is pretty much Nintendo's superpower, and while that does sometimes have horrific outcomes, sometimes it means they simply produce what they think is cool. Which brings us to Splatoon, one of the greatest funky fresh IPs to come out since Super Mario, and honestly nothing as exciting has happened to the video game industry since. If you want to support these videos, you can become a channel member, by the way, or I will send Chucky Egg after you. I've talked a lot about Splatoon, the third game in particular, and why the content of the games themselves is so good and well thought out. But today we're here to focus on the artwork created for these games, both in the early concept phases before the games even existed, and later on alongside the finished product as promotional material. But hold up, because this art barely even looks like the game at all, and that's probably what I love about it more than anything. We've been staring at 3D models of squids for like 8 years now. We know what these games look like, so why not make something fresh and original which uses the medium it's in to its fullest advantage? Look at this promotional image for Fallout 4. Sure, some parts of this picture are worth looking at, but it pretty much just looks like the game, which doesn't have much of an inspired style to begin with. Now look at this picture. I don't actually know which picture I'm going to choose yet, but I'm sure it looks sick. Now to be clear, I don't think Fallout 4 is a bad game or even has bad art. These are very much cherry-picked examples to prove my point that this is better than this. The promotional art for Splatoon isn't something a video game can even look like. It's in this painterly style with texture and rough edges and big chunky shapes of color. It's kind of flat, but it also works perfectly in perspective. The rendering is simplified, but the understanding of light and color is clear with reflections, subsurface scattering, atmospheric perspective, and really awesome textures. The color choices are so bold and purposeful, always focusing on a great use of bright, contrasting colors, just like the games. Splatoon is a game about style and energy, but this only really shines through when you're playing it. The excitement you're getting comes from your own input, and the artwork captures how that feels and how we see our Inklings in our minds, rather than how they really look. This may not be the Splatoon that shows up on my monitor, but it is the Splatoon that's in my heart, and if you disagree, then fuck you. He is coming for you right now. Finished art isn't the only thing that matters though. In fact, none of this could exist without the rough concepts that got us to this point. What you see in-game and in promotional material is only the tip of the iceberg. Splatoon's art and design goes so much further with a ton of different drafts and ideas, some of which turned into the final design and some of which were completely forgotten. If you're a fan of Splatoon's art or just art in general, I'd highly recommend the Splatoon art books. They're full of so many amazing concepts, and I love how the notes left by the artists are all translated, giving you a better look into their design process. Most importantly, the fun of Splatoon's design remains throughout the whole thing. There's really never a dull moment or drawing. Even creating a silhouette of an Inkling used for scale is given some personality. By the way, if you do want to check these books out, and I highly recommend that you do, you can use the links in the description of this video. But no matter how good you are, there's always room for improvement. Unless you're me, of course. I peaked when I was 9 with Pokemon Fights.mp4. Yep. Anyway though, the art has probably changed more between the games than you'd realize at first, with the difference between 1 and 3 being extremely clear just by the art style alone. Over time it's become less detailed and rendered, with more of a focus on simple, clear shapes. The newer art looks a lot better to me personally. If you look at the faces in particular, the Splatoon art gets quite messy, and I think the cleaner look of the recent art is just a bit nicer. I also want to take a moment to appreciate the actual artists behind all of this. It's been hard to figure out exactly who's responsible for what. If you Google Splatoon artists, it just comes up with, yeah. But Splatoon's art director, Sato Inoue, is undoubtedly a huge reason all of this art is the way that it is. You can follow him on Instagram at Tori-kun, and it's so cool to see what has become the Splatoon art style used in his personal work. He's such a master of texture and lighting using chunky shapes and brushstrokes, with amazing gesture, perspective and energy to everything as well. I mean, he's not quite as good as me just yet, but I'm sure he'll get there soon enough. All Splatoon games look the same is a fairly common sentiment that I've seen online, and don't get me wrong, I know exactly why someone would say this. They're stupid, or their lives just don't revolve around games made for children. One of those two. Okay, obviously there are many similarities between the games, that's how sequels work after all, but over the course of just 3 entries in the series we've seen an evolution of ideas and artistic expression from what is essentially an experiment to something far more refined. Each game is its own vital piece of the puzzle that turns Splatoon's UI into the thing of beauty we see today, with some clear trends throughout each entry that I'll let you see if you can figure out on your own before I get into it too much. For more contents like this, go to the Splatoon 3 analysis playlist, and to support this channel, become a channel member. Welcome to 2015, you're that one weird kid who owns a Wii U. But if you had been keeping up religiously with the latest Nintendo announcements, and let's be real, you were, you'd know Nintendo were about to release some kind of weird squid-based, motion-controlled ink shooting game using their infamously bad online multiplayer. My point is that this was a weird time for Nintendo. While it's easy to forget these days with the Switch's success, back then you really were in the minority if your primary console was a Wii U.
Yoshi! It's a double Yoshi explosion!
Nintendo knew it was a lost cause, and even the far more successful 3DS was on its last legs, so they moved all their resources to the upcoming Nintendo NX and essentially left us behind for a while. And yet, during this period, they released an extremely creative and experimental game with an absurd amount of time put into the design, the lore, unique gameplay and music, and quality control. This game was a huge risk that paid off thanks to the developers' hard work, creativity, and understanding of fun game design. It's the foundation for everything that came after, and it's kind of really awkward and rough. Let's start with something a little nitpicky to give a simple but clear example of what I mean. This is what the introduction to a game of Turf War looks like, right? We've got this huge black splat graphic in the middle, contrasting the large white text, so everything's easy to read. Every graphic down to the black borders behind the text has some kind of creative texture. It all feels messy and fun as Splatoon should, but still remains modern, cohesive, and easy to understand. Well, that certainly is how Splatoon 3 looks, but let's rewind to the Wii U days and... oh, I guess someone at Nintendo sent their toddler in to do their job that day, and the toddler didn't have any hands or a brain. Now, despite being a weeaboo fucking piece of shit, overcritical idiot who makes fun of brainless children, I technically am a professional graphic designer. And if there's one key fundamental to all of graphic design, it's organizing information based on priority. This is why the title of a thing is always bigger and stands out more than some random disclaimer at the bottom. It's all about what you want people to see first, breaking down the information you're communicating so it's easy to digest. This screen just doesn't do that. All the text is the same color and almost the same size, so at a glance you struggle to figure out what to read first. Ink the most turf to win is actually slightly bigger, which I don't fully understand the reasoning behind. Generally you'd make the short, easy to understand sentences the focal point and keep longer explanations smaller. There's a faint shadow effect, but this will still get hard to read when it's up against something white in the background. The name of the map is nice to have, but it's ultimately redundant when almost the entire screen is dedicated to showing the map we're about to play on. There's just no need for this text to be given as much priority as everything else. Despite my praise of Splatoon 3, it was actually Splatoon 2 that took Splatoon's rough formula to the next level. It has all the same elements, but organized information based on priority using size and contrast, and pushed far less relevant information out of the way. Splatoon 2's UI absolutely had some missteps, and trust me, we will get to those, but in many cases it introduced the most important changes that Splatoon 3 would later refine. And really that's the consistent theme between these three games. Splatoon created the entire aesthetic of the series, but in hindsight it has a lot of awkward and arbitrary design decisions. These elements had time to be better thought out in Splatoon 2, which gave the game a much stronger sense of identity, and then Splatoon 3 had even more time to iron out any kinks and consider how every single element would contribute to the Splatoon experience. Now, to keep this video balanced, we're going to switch gear from why Splatoon 2's contributions were so important to why its UI is actually trash. If Splatoon 2's UI was a person, it would be the fucking Tasmanian devil. Like, can you stay still for a single frame so I can figure out what I'm looking at? Not only does every single button have an animated background behind it, but there are two separate backgrounds for different rows. The L and R buttons keep flashing as if we need a reminder that they exist, and even the non-animated UI elements have this noisy line background. Noise is really the perfect word to describe this, or visual noise to be specific. So many things are happening at all times for seemingly no reason, and none of this helps the user understand or navigate the menu. We have to give Splatoon 1's map a little bit of leeway because its purpose is different, being on the gamepad touchscreen in this case. The icons are bigger and laid out differently for this purpose, like putting the equip button in the bottom left corner so you can quickly access hits with your thumb. Splatoon 2 reworked this for a gamepad-less console, but also improved the aesthetic. These arbitrary rounded shapes are just kind of, well, arbitrary, and don't contribute anything to the visual design. I think Splatoon 2 was right to do away with this stuff, but it debatably went too far and everything became too uniform. Almost everything is a rounded rectangle, which doesn't really communicate the messy fun Splatoon is known for. There's this little ink dribble on the selected element, but even that is mostly uniform and lacking in any kind of texture. Everything is just a bit too clean and shiny, and while at the time it was perfectly functional, in hindsight it just wasn't immersive or consistent to the Splatoon experience, as cringe as that may sound. I also thought the design of the map here was never particularly useful, showing you the square from basically the same perspective the player has in-game. Splatoon 3 took the improvements made by Splatoon 2 and refined them, creating a more unified and polished experience. Instead of arbitrary or clean, consistent shapes, UI elements are directly tied into the theme of Splatoon itself. They use the colourful, creative aspects of the game and take the UI in an arts and crafts direction. Each element is a unique shape that's been crudely cut out. They've thought through this design language to the point that secondary elements like the border used to organize the modes from the shops also fits into the theme. For the map itself, the border for this element is a piece of paper that's been torn and stapled down, and to add extra interest, it also leaves the border of the main object that it's a part of. The map itself is made from various photos stuck down with tape that also serve as the arrows communicating which sections connect. By the way, this entire menu is also bigger than it was in Splatoon 2, on account of the equip button being shrunk down significantly, another leftover relic from Splatoon 1, and these pointless L&R speech bubbles being removed. You'll also notice more texture in every element of these menus, including the small icons at the top. As a side note, they also updated the status icon to include octolings this time. Going back to the visual noise of Splatoon 2, Splatoon 3's menus are a lot less distracting. Almost everything is specifically designed, but it's still. The only consistently playing animation is the squid cursor and the map pin, which therefore grab your attention and bring your eye to the option you're selecting. This contrast is well used to lead the eye, rather than just having random stuff all over the place. Splatoon 3's map menu is probably the least least touchscreen friendly, and of course even without the gamepad the Switch does still have a touchscreen, but I imagine most people are using buttons to navigate regardless. Though as a side note, I am terrified of anyone brave enough to play Splatoon in handheld mode. You freak. Okay, enough with the menus though, let's hop into a match and murder some squid children. Isn't that like the third time I've mentioned killing children in this video? The HUD, while actually in-game, is probably the most important aspect of Splatoon's UI. It needs to communicate vital information in the smallest amount of time possible, while still being appealing to look at after hundreds of hours of gameplay. Going back to Splatoon 1, you'll realize just how rough this actually started out. In the jump from 1 to 2, the timer was moved, removing this redundant versus graphic. The squid icons at the top were updated to tell you what weapons were in use, a graphic was added to show which sub-weapon you have, and your score was overall made less bulky. Though they also removed the icons to indicate which sub-abilities you have equipped, which is debatable whether that's a good change or not. But another good change was the updated D-pad communications. Come on was changed to the more useful this way, and in the EU English translation, nice was changed to booyah, in line with the American version. Come on and nice are actually far more accurate translations of the Japanese version of Splatoon, but the updated text just works better locally in my opinion. From Splatoon 1 to 2, the special icon was changed from a 3D model to a 2D graphic, but the weapons were still 2D, so it was a little inconsistent. In Splatoon 3 this was updated, so all of them are consistent 2D graphics. Now, I have actually spoken about this in a previous video which I'll let you watch after instead of repeating myself, but Splatoon 3 also makes huge improvements by indicating where other players have been slattered with this graphic, and has a slightly eye-catching but not distracting X animation at the top when someone dies. All of this simply communicates more information to the player, allowing anyone to be more aware and play better without putting in any extra effort. What is Splatoon 3's next weapon class? Well, what I can tell you is what it might be, and this isn't just a video about rough speculation. I'm going to use real-world evidence to plan and design this new weapon, considering actual game balance including the kits that might work for it. However, I made a pretty big mistake in the early stages here that I'll come back to, but for now I'll see if you can spot that on your own. If you want to support these videos, you can become a channel member. So where do you even start with a project like this? Splatoon has some extremely unique weapons that you wouldn't see anywhere else, but the majority of them do have some kind of equivalent in other online shooters. After all, game design can only be so unique and creative if you also want those designs to be intuitive for players to understand, and keep the difficult task of balancing the game within the realm of possibility. It's hard enough to plan for all these factors when you actually have the weapon working in-game, but since I have to use my imagination to speculate, I'm going to relate this design to what's already been proven to work elsewhere. So that still leaves me with a lot of possibilities, but after carefully considering my options, here's what I decided on. Something that always stood out to me about Splatoon in particular is how the different ink-based weapons can interact with the map in more interesting ways than standard bullets, like how stringers, sloshers, and blasters can all shoot around walls to some extent. So my new weapon class is going to allow for that same level of flexibility, using a grenade launcher inspired weapon similar to TF2's Demo Man and Junkrat from Overwatch. So while coming up with the basic idea of how this should work, I quickly decided ink cartridges would be the way to go if I wanted to create some kind of grenade equivalent within Splatoon. Every weapon shoots ink and these things are just a real life ink bomb. You ever had one of these things just explode in your pockets for no reason? Yeah, it f***ing sucks. Anyway, the initial design for a weapon that shoots exploding ink cartridges was actually fairly straightforward, just use more ink cartridges. There's so many different kinds and sizes, but I always thought the ones you put into a regular sized printer were pretty cool. It's kind of fun to load them into the printer, kind of makes you feel like a mechanic or something. So that's what I used for the main body here. All you need to do is combine this cool looking guy with a grenade launcher and you pretty quickly have a rough draft to work with. It doesn't look like a conventional gun, but that's intentional, especially the front part here where the ink cartridges are shot from. You expect a gun to have a narrow shooting hole, because guns are supposed to be precise. So with the long, flat front here, we're actually intuitively communicating that this gun is not precise at all. I also had the front bits here flap around a bit. I thought it would be a cool way to incorporate the top of the ink cartridge like that, and it's kind of a reference to Junkrat's gun, which this is loosely based on. I always love the way that little flap moves around. Now, this is just the initial design and we're going to come back to a more finalized one in the Splatoon 3 style in just a second. Plus we also still need to come up with a name. But first, now that it may have become obvious, let's talk about my major mistake up until this point. Unfortunately, after all this work, I had made a major oversight. I guess the trauma from having to deal with this annoying weapon caused my brain to erase the memories. But during the early design process, I completely forgot the Bloblobber existed, and I have to admit this new weapon fits a very similar niche. But after some heavy consideration about whether or not I should just restart the whole project, I think this is not only okay, but maybe even makes this new weapon even more believable. For developers, staying within the realm of what already works simplifies their job considerably. And when you think about it, Splatoon 3's weapon classes already follow this trend. Stringers play similarly to charges, and Splatanas are very similar to brushes. Now, don't get all pedantic at me in the comments for saying this. I realize they play very differently, but they are adjacent to each other rather than being entirely unique. So this new weapon class will be that same thing to the Slosher class, or the Bloblobber specifically. It will exist within the same kind of range, but I need to make sure I place differently enough to be unique. And here's how we'll do that. By the way, am I the only one who up until now thought the Bloblobber was its own thing and not in the Slosher class? Like, in hindsight, I see the connection there and why it would be, but I always thought it was pretty different. So first things first is making it clear that this is not in the Slosher class, which is actually fairly straightforward. Sloshers all shoot using a swing motion that throws out ink at an upward angle. Our new class won't be like this. If anything, it shoots more like a blaster. Shots are straightforward, but they only launch one ink cartridge at a time with a pretty long gap between shots. However, unlike blasters, this is when gravity comes into effect and the shot acts more like a single Bloblobber bubble. The maximum range is about the same as a Bloblobber, so after shooting, the cartridges would detonate after about 1.5 seconds. Unless they hit a target, of course, in which case they'll explode for a 125 damage direct hit. If you're in the explosion range for an indirect hit, you'll take about 70 damage depending on how close, and this will also happen if you're standing too close to someone who took a direct hit. Now, that's a lot of damage for how much range the weapon has, but they're hard to aim and this weapon is slow. Not to mention you only get 5 shots before your ink tank is completely empty. While this weapon... okay, actually, we should probably just come up with a name for this thing. The Cartridger? The Bang? You know, it's not a very inspired name, but Launcher would do just fine and fit with the other class names. We can call this specific launcher the Cartridge Launcher. Makes sense. The cartridge launcher is extremely slow and ink hungry, but has a lot of utility. Cartridges can be bounced off surfaces, allowing for some sick trick shots, similar to the Bloblobber, but they start with more speed, like a blaster shot. That said, it's only a single shot at a time, so if you miss, you could be in trouble. Since you're so slow, faster weapons might be able to approach and take you down at short range, but you'll still be able to defend yourself in this position. As long as your positioning isn't bad and you're keeping your ink tank topped up, you still have a decent weapon for taking out enemies in a single hit if your aim is good enough. So in short, it shoots like a blaster with bouncing bullets similar to a single Bloblobber shot, and then explodes like a stringer shot after a set amount of time. It deals a huge amount of damage, but it's extremely slow and ink hungry, so if you're missing a lot of shots, you won't be achieving much. Its inking ability also isn't great, with a small trail of ink being left behind by the cartridge, and a decent amount of additional ink when it explodes. If you get stuck in enemy ink and aren't able to get any kills to defend yourself, you're pretty much guaranteed to get splattered. Unlike a blaster, you can't just shoot at the ground to paint your feet, since the cartridges take 1.5 seconds to explode. As for the kit, we're going to give it the sprinkler to help with important tasks like painting the splat zone or your own feet in some cases. And I think we can make this one of the rare weapons with tent missiles as a special. Its ink output will be low enough that I think charging your special will take a while, so it shouldn't become too spammy. And now all of that sorted, let's create the final design for our cartridge launcher in the Splatoon 3 style. And being able to directly compare my design to what's already in the game resulted in a lot of changes to make it properly fit in. I showed the initial design to Gamer from the famous Splatoon 3 analysis series that you should definitely check out right now, and he pointed out the hero shot in Splatoon 3 already uses an ink cartridge theme, but it's a different kind of cartridge, so I should be okay. I guess it's nice to have my ideas justified by the fact that they're already in the game in some form, but I need to make sure my idea is unique enough that it can be added into the game as something new. One of my main problems with the first design is that my eye wasn't led to the front of the gun. It's so blunt that it doesn't really stand out, and that could make the weapon hard to understand within a split second, so that's not good for game design. So I kind of cheated and just straight up added an arrow into the design, pointing you forward. And I later revised this with a different arrow design using the branding from the sticker that would appear on the front. The gun just looked far too plain without some additional decals like this. I always liked these little chips ink cartridges have so they can communicate with the printer, so I added another one to the side to make the design more interesting. The handle design was also improved to be comfier and overall be more stylish. and I moved the hinge on the front flap to be at the top. My original idea would be that it would always hang down, but I decided having it briefly open like a cat's flap to indicate the weapon being shot might be better. You might also notice the use of darker and lighter colors here, which I realized Nintendo were using in their artwork to communicate depth. So here it is, the cartridge launcher from Splatoon 3's hypothetical new launcher class. If I did a good job with the design, it should roughly fit into this image. I want to clarify that I know I'm no expert when it comes to game design and balance, and I actually don't even have that much time to play video games these days. So let me know what you changed about this class to make it work, or if you don't even think it's unique enough to be its own class in the first place. I would like to create more weapon concepts within the launcher class, or even other possible classes, maybe new specials, or even playable characters or NPCs that Splatoon could have in the future. But in order to do that, I need to know there's a demand for that content, so let me know. Or if you want to see me analyze the content that actually is in Splatoon 3, go to the Splatoon 3 analysis playlist.